Ready to ditch the usual news and dive into something a bit more, well, timeless.
Sounds intriguing.
We're tackling a fascinating mix of classic Persian poetry and some really thought-provoking modern reflections.
All inspired by...
The one and only Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam.
Khayyam, a true master of capturing life's big questions.
Exactly. It's like we're tracing a conversation across centuries about life, death, the universe, all woven together by these beautiful verses.
Well, you don't need to be a poetry buff to follow along. We'll guide you.
Exactly. Think of the Rubaiyat as a collection of these little four-line poems, each one a world of its own.
Like compressed wisdom.
And to add to that, we've got these contemporary pieces, poems and reflections, directly sparked by Khayyam's work.
So it's like a dialogue across time, right?
Totally. And what's fascinating is how these modern voices bring fresh perspectives to Khayyam's themes. They make them feel so relevant, even now.
It's amazing how some ideas just resonate across centuries.
Right, like this idea of impermanence. It's a big one in the Rubaiyat.
Impermanence?
Yeah, this idea that life is constantly changing, always in flux. Khayyam uses these vivid images of life as a journey, and, well, death is the inevitable destination.
He doesn't shy away from those big realities.
No, he doesn't. But it's not meant to be morbid.
More like a wake-up call.
Exactly. He's urging us to find beauty in that impermanence, to celebrate the simple joys.
Which are?
He talks a lot about wine, music, love.
The classics.
Right. But it's not about obsessing over them. It's more like he's saying, hey, savor these things, enjoy them while you can.
Because they won't last forever.
Exactly. And listener, what are some of the things in your own life, those simple joys, that remind you to savor the present moment?
I think that's a question we could all ask ourselves more often.
Totally. But Khayyam wasn't just about celebrating the good stuff. He could also be pretty provocative, especially when it came to challenging the status quo.
Oh yeah, he didn't hold back. Especially when it came to...
religion.
Exactly. This was 11th century Persia, remember? Religion and politics were pretty much inseparable.
And Khayyam wasn't afraid to poke fun at hypocrisy or blind faith.
He had a knack for cutting through dogma and getting to the heart of the matter.
Right. One of my favorite poems, he goes after those who, talk the talk but don't walk the walk.
The hypocrites.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, instead of clinging to rigid rules, open your eyes, look at the world around you, think for yourself.
And that's a message that stood the test of time, hasn't it?
Totally. Speaking of things that have stood the test of time, we have to talk about this incredible story.
Oh, I know this one. The Great Omar Edition.
Yes. Have you heard of it?
Who hasn't? It's a legendary tale.
So, for our listeners who haven't, picture this. A lavish, jewel-encrusted book of poetry, handcrafted, one of a kind.
Fit for a king.
That tragically went down with the Titanic.
Oh, the irony. Talk about impermanence, right. This incredibly valuable object created to celebrate beauty and knowledge, lost at the bottom of the ocean.
It's almost too poetic, isn't it? But wait, there's more.
There's more.
A century later, they found it.
No.
Yes. It's this tangible link to the past, a reminder that even in loss, something endures. And it just makes you think, right, what truly lasts? And how do we make the most of our time on this floating rock we call home?
It's a poignant example of how these things, art, philosophy, history, they all intersect to create something truly thought-provoking.
Right. It's not just about the words on the page, but the stories we build around them, the connections we make.
Exactly.
Okay, before we get too existential on you all, let's talk about calendars.
Calendars, where'd that come from?
Stay with me here. There's this really cool part in the material where they discuss a contemporary calendar reform.
Calendar reform, as in like changing how we track time.
Yeah, and it's directly inspired by Khayyam's philosophy of embracing the present moment.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So this fellow, Austin, decided that our current calendar just wasn't cutting it.
What's wrong with our calendar other than January seeming to last forever?
Right. He was all about maximizing joy, minimizing those January blues. So he completely reworks the calendar, gets rid of those dreary winter months.
Okay, I like where this is going. What does he replace them with?
He calls it Fun Day.
Fun Day? Is that what it sounds like?
You got it. It's a day each week dedicated to enjoyment. No work, no chores, just pure, unadulterated fun.
I could get behind that.
Right. In a world that's so obsessed with productivity and hustle, Fun Day sounds almost radical, doesn't it?
It does, but it also makes perfect sense considering Khayyam's emphasis on savoring the moment.
It really makes you think, what if we restructured our lives, our calendars even, to prioritize joy, fulfillment?
It's a question worth pondering for sure.
It is. But speaking of big questions,
There's more.
this deep dive is just getting started. Remember that graveyard of the gods we mentioned earlier?
How could I forget? It sounds way too interesting.
Well, get ready for a wander among the headstones because things are about to get really thought-provoking. Welcome back to our little exploration of poetry, philosophy, and all those big questions that make us go, what's it all about?
The search for meaning continues.
It does. And remember that graveyard of the gods we mentioned?
How could I forget? We left off standing at the gate.
Well, get ready to wander among the headstones because things are about to get really interesting.
I'm ready. So remind me, what is this graveyard of the gods exactly?
Right. It's not a literal graveyard, of course. It's this metaphorical space. A place where those discarded deities and outdated beliefs kind of rest.
Outdated beliefs? Like what?
You name it. You'll find remnants of those ancient pantheons, Greek, Roman, Norse.
Oh, so Zeus and Odin are hanging out in this graveyard.
Exactly. Even some figures from more obscure mythologies you've probably never even heard of.
Sounds like a fascinating crowd, but what's the point? Why are we talking about these forgotten gods?
Well, it's a powerful reminder that even the things we hold most sacred, those beliefs we think are unshakable, well,
They can change.
exactly. What was once worshipped as divine can fade, often replaced by new ways of understanding the world.
It's easy to look back at those ancient cultures and think, wow, they really believed in that. But,
They were grappling with the same big questions we are today.
Exactly. They just had different answers based on what they knew then.
Right, and that's what's so fascinating. Knowledge evolves.
It's true. Take astrology, for example. It used to be a driving force in people's lives, shaping decisions.
Now it's more like, what's your sign? Oh, that's so you.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, what will future generations make of the things we consider to be, absolute truths today?
It's a humbling thought.
It is. And this graveyard, it's not just about ancient stuff. They're also those more recent ideas, things that have fallen out of favor that kind of ended up in this metaphorical graveyard.
Oh, like what?
Well, the material even touches upon this idea of intelligent design.
Right, this idea that life's complexity points to like an intentional creator.
Exactly. And while it's a belief that many still hold today, our sources offer this really thought-provoking counter-argument. It all comes down to this idea of infinite regress.
Infinite regress, that sounds intense.
It is. Basically, it asks, if something as complex as life needs a creator, well then, who created the creator?
Ah, I see where you're going with this. It's
Yeah.
like turtles all the way down.
Exactly. It creates this endless loop and highlights the limitations we bump up against when trying to explain the ultimate origins of the universe.
Like some mysteries might just be beyond our grasp.
Maybe. But that doesn't mean we stop asking the questions, right?
Never stop questioning.
Exactly. But you know me, I always like to bring it back to our own lives. So if this graveyard of the gods shows us that even our most strongly held beliefs can change,
What makes you wonder?
what beliefs or assumptions are we holding on to that might need a little reevaluation?
A little self-reflection never hurt anyone.
Exactly. But now, we're going to shift gears a bit. We're going from the vastness of the cosmos to something equally mysterious.
Our own minds.
You got it. We're diving into the fascinating landscape of consciousness.
Things are about to get really meta.
They are. And our source material, both those ancient poems and the modern reflections, they get pretty heady here.
Heady in what way?
Well, first off, you'll notice how they both use such vivid imagery and metaphors to try to grasp something as slippery as consciousness.
Yeah, consciousness isn't exactly something you can easily pin down and examine under a microscope.
Exactly. And there's this one passage where they describe it like a stream, this constant flow of thoughts, sensations, perceptions.
I like that because it emphasizes just how elusive consciousness is. Like you can try to grab hold of a thought, but it just slips through your finger.
Right. It's constantly changing, always in motion. But what I find really fascinating here is how they connect this to the poetry itself.
What do you mean?
They argue that poetry, with its ability to evoke emotions, to tap into those sensory experiences, offers this really unique way to explore the subjective nature of consciousness.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. Give me an example.
Think about those lines in the Rubaiyat that really make you feel something, you know? The warmth of the sun on your skin, the sweetness of like a ripe fig, the sting of loss. Those images, they bypass that logical part of your brain and tap into something deeper, something,
One more primal.
yeah, something closer to the raw experience of just being alive.
Which is what makes consciousness so tricky to pin down, right?
Right. Science can map our brains, identify those regions responsible for certain functions.
But capturing the feeling of what it's like to experience those things.
That's a whole other ballgame.
Exactly. And that's where this concept of qualia comes in.
Qualia.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, right? Qualia are those subjective, qualitative experiences that are nearly impossible to explain or measure objectively.
Like trying to describe a sunset to someone who's blind.
Perfect example. You can talk about the colors, the light, but you can't truly convey that subjective experience of seeing it.
Wow. It really makes you wonder, right? If some things, maybe the most meaningful things, can ever be fully explained or understood through, logic alone.
Maybe some things just have to be experienced.
Right. Okay, so how do our sources suggest we even begin to approach something as complex and mysterious as consciousness?
Well, they stress that it's not about finding definitive answers.
It's more about the journey.
Exactly. It's about embracing the mystery, asking the right questions, and being willing to challenge our own assumptions about what it means to be, conscious.
Right, because what we think we know might be totally wrong.
Exactly. And speaking of assumptions, our sources don't shy away from tackling some of the biggest philosophical puzzles out there, like this whole debate about mental causation.
Mental causation.
Yeah, how our intangible thoughts can actually influence our physical actions. How can something like the desire to have a cup of coffee actually make your arm move? It's a question that has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries.
It's true. I've never really thought about it like that.
Right, it's pretty mind-boggling. But what's so interesting here is how they connect this whole debate back to Khayyam's ideas about the interconnectedness of, everything. Remember how he describes the universe as this intricate tapestry, everything woven together, influencing everything else.
But our thoughts and feelings, they're not happening in some vacuum. They're part of this web, this energy, this information, all constantly influencing and being influenced by the world around us.
Exactly. And that leads us to one of the most mind-bending ideas in all of this material.
Oh, and what's that?
The idea of dissolving the illusion of a separate self.
Dissolving the self. Okay, now we're really going deep. What exactly does that even mean? Are we talking about like an out-of-body experience?
Not quite. It's more about challenging this deeply ingrained belief that we are these separate, independent entities.
Okay, so less about astral projection, more about challenging our assumptions. I like it. But how?
Our sources suggest that the self, the way we usually think about it, is actually much more fluid, much more interconnected than we realize.
Okay, I'm intrigued. I remember they used this really cool metaphor to explain this whole thing, something about a magic lantern.
Right. Imagine a lantern projecting images onto a screen.
Got it. Classic image.
Now, the lantern, that represents that fundamental reality we were talking about earlier, that source of everything and those images being projected. Those are our thoughts, emotions, perceptions, all constantly in flux.
Oh, okay, I'm picturing it.
Yeah.
So where does the self fit into this magic lantern show?
That's the key question, right? The self, it isn't the lantern itself, and it's not any single image.
So it's both.
Neither. It's more like the entire process. The light, the shadows, the way the images change and flow, the unfolding story.
Wow. So it's less about being a fixed self and more about...
Becoming. Our sources suggest it's more about how we're constantly becoming through our experiences rather than clinging to some fixed idea of who we are.
It's like that saying, the only constant is change, right? We're always in process, shaped by every interaction, every thought, every fleeting moment.
Precisely. And that brings us right back to Khayyam's central theme of impermanence.
It all connects, full circle.
Exactly. It's not just about accepting that life is fleeting, but about embracing the transformative power of that constant change.
It's like that graveyard of the gods we talked about, right? Yeah. Just as our ideas about the divine have changed over time, so too has our understanding of ourselves. What we consider me today might look completely different tomorrow.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it?
It is,
Yeah.
but also kind of exciting, right?
Absolutely. Because if we're not bound by these rigid definitions of self, then we have this incredible freedom to learn, to grow, to become something new.
It's a call to action, to step outside those comfort zones, challenge those assumptions, and embrace the unknown.
And maybe, just maybe, by doing that, we create a more authentic, more fulfilling life. One that's aligned with that interconnectedness that runs through all things.
I love that. But before we wrap up this incredible deep dive, we have to address the elephant in the room. The question that always seems to pop up when we talk about consciousness.
Free will.
Bingo. Any chance our source material tackles that age-old debate?
You know it does. And true to form, it doesn't offer easy answers.
Lay it on me.
It acknowledges those scientific studies suggesting that our choices, even those we think are totally conscious, might be influenced by factors we're not even aware of. Our genes, our upbringing, even our brain chemistry.
So is it all predetermined then? Are we just along for the ride?
Not necessarily. It suggests free will exists on a kind of spectrum with varying degrees of conscious control and unconscious influence. It's complex, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the answer isn't about finding a definitive yes or no.
More about understanding the interplay.
Exactly. Trying to understand how our conscious choices and those unseen forces all come together to shape our lives.
Wow. So much to think about. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Rubaiyat, those incredible modern reflections, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all this?
You know, I think the beauty of both poetry and philosophy lies in their power to make us ask those big questions, to ignite our curiosity and remind us that there's always more to learn, more to discover about ourselves and the universe. If our deep dive encourages even one person to question their assumptions, to find beauty in life's impermanence, and to savor the present moment, well, I think that's a success.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners with some final words of wisdom from the great Omar Khayyam himself. Be happy for this moment. This moment is your life. Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Of golden skies are blue, with our courage burning bright. Arm in arm we'll face the might, together we ignite. Fields of gold, skies are blue, every step is leading true. With our dreams we'll pursue, till the end we come through. Fields of gold, skies of blue, every step is leading true. Since outputs always have inputs so true, then what we wonder should we try to do? It's the other way around, oh brain stew. For cause stars, time and the universe. Do you